home.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Now, your book is Stand Firm,
Yes.
right? And it's from the darkness of pornography and sexual sin to the light of God's grace.
Absolutely.
That's a beautiful topic, and because it's always, like we say, covered in shame, right? So much of the time.
Well, it is. I could really relate to what you were both talking about. There's such fear. I lived a lot of my life in fear of somebody knew. Somebody knew that I was sexually abused, by a neighbor. And
How young were you?
I was 9 years old. And I finally just recently learned that it wasn't sexual abuse. That's a new, politically correct term. I was raped.
Yes.
You've got to put it the way it really was.
Right.
But I didn't want to talk about it. I had such fear.
Of course.
Because if somebody found that out, especially in the church, well, what did you do
to deserve
that?
Or to attract it?
Of course. So I had those feelings, and that, there was a lot of things happened to me when I was 9 years old. My brother had a lot of anger, and I didn't really understand why then. So he was very abusive toward me. Actually put me in the hospital for 30 days, and with a pitchfork to the head, and it's not.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, but
That's
there was
intense.
a lot of other abuses of hitting and, hunting me with a gun and with the intent to do me in.
To shoot you, yeah.
I was, so I had a lot of fear, but who am I going to tell? Again, if I tell, back then, that's 40 some years ago. I mean, people would have said, well, what did you do? What did you do to cause him to be so angry with you? Right. I didn't know that he was angry because he had also been sexually abused. I mean, that comes out, 60 years later.
Right.
But, so there was things that happened to me that set the stage for who I was becoming. And in that same time, a group of older boys handed me a stack of pornography to keep me busy so I wouldn't be in their way for a half a day. And I always, now I tell my oldest, or not my oldest brother, but my one brother in between, I said, well, that really worked. Kept me busy for 28 years.
Yeah, wow.
The pieces inside of my head and the learning that was happening was that, sex kind of made me feel better, but it really was in a dysfunctional place. It wasn't the way it was intended to be. And the abuse made me feel like I really deserved to be abused. And so I would isolate myself to be alone a lot and alone to be sexual. Well, when you're married, that doesn't really work too well. You can't. So it worked well when I was a little boy. I could do some self-nurturing and I seemed to cope and be able to get along. But as the older I got, the more that coping mechanism wasn't working in real relationships, it was actually bringing destruction to the relationships where I couldn't have relationships, not good ones anyway. But still, the fear was there. Now, if I tell somebody about all of this stuff, what are they going to do with me? And I complicated the matters by going to college and getting a degree in psychology and in theology. I became a pastor, and I'm like, okay, now I can solve all my own problems because I'm really godly and I know a lot of scripture.
Interesting.
Or not.
So that was
work.
a way that you're really you're trying to help yourself.
Trying to help
the best
myself.
way you understood.
Right. But I realized, as time went on, that I couldn't help myself. I had to learn to surrender to the fact that I couldn't. And that was hard for me because I was very much a do-it-yourselfer, accomplishing kind of person that could accomplish anything except help myself.
So what made the change? Was there something specific that happened?
Yeah, after 20 years of marriage, my wife had kind of had who I was, and I was two different people. I was Jekyll and Hyde. I was a good person and on the outside, but the people closest to me saw the person that wasn't so good. And I came home to a note that she wanted a divorce, and I was in a huge 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom home at the time, and it was empty. And I called a counselor that I had been seeing, a Christian counselor, and the very thing I had feared all my life happened to me. When I told him over the phone, I said, I think what's really going on, and I've never told anybody, is I have a secret attraction to pornography, and I think that's what's going on inside of me. And he said, really? He said, I think you're too far gone for anybody to help you.
Wow.
That just
And it was the very
breaks my
rejection, that I had thought was going to happen to me, that judgment that you talked about, of the Pharisee, and happened to me. Well, the good thing that man did was hand me a number. It was a telephone number for somebody in New York City. He said some secret group called the Augustine Fellowship. I was scared to death when I called that number, and on the other end, I found that I wasn't alone. It was Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and it's no longer a secret organization. And it began the journey of learning that there were other people like me.
Yeah.
And I started going to recovery groups, and then from that went to professional counseling, began a relationship over a long period of time with a counselor, and began to go deep inside of me to find out what was it in the core of me that was wrong. And
Right. And what you found then was not just the addiction itself. It was what was beyond that. The pain beyond that was the actual issue.
And that's what needed to change.
Right.
I could change not looking at pornography maybe, but really would that change me? Not at all. And I think that is the journey that God set me on through the whole process, was that I needed to be changed. I needed to, and when you, at least for me, dealing with pornography is an addiction that's very similar to idolatry, where I really replaced God with another God. And so God did not deliver me in the sense of the big magic wand, even though, boy, did I want that.
Of course, we all do.
Every day.
I don't want to work that hard, But it was this journey that he put me on to be able to take every thought captive, everything that was going on up here in my brain, everything that I believed, my behaviors, why did I behave the way I behaved, what was the way I thought. And I had to take all of those thoughts and say, well, are they God's thoughts? Or are these my thoughts? Or are they somebody else's? Or are they from the trauma that happened to me when I was young? A lot of it came from that trauma.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of it I picked up along the way. But by taking those thoughts captive, by replacing them with God's thoughts, in that process, I began to think as God thinks. And my behaviors started to change. And in that, it's a transformation process that happens. And I love the scripture about being transformed by the renewal of your mind. Transform is a metamorphosis. Is a Greek word, means to be a metamorphosis, a complete change. It's kind of like from a caterpillar to a butterfly.
Yeah, right.
And the renewal is a carpenter word. Surprised that God would use a carpenter word, and I'm a carpenter, so I just love the word. But to be rebuilt. So it's like a renovation project. So if you've ever renovated a house, where you take out old stuff and you put in the new stuff,
Sometimes
it's like the
gotta
old
look
kitchen,
worse
you took
before
it
it
all
looks
out, you
better,
bring
yeah.
in the new kitchen, and you go, wow, that's what a transformation. Well, that's what should be in our life. When we take the before pictures of our life, here I am broken and shattered without the power of God in my life. But when that power of God comes into my life through His Word, and we're transformed through that, we step back and say, whoa, man, what a change.
Amazing.
And that's what God has brought to me. What a change.
Fantastic. What was the moment then for you where you felt like you were really, we call it blooming. We were finally coming out of that dark place.
Oh, I think, when the behavior started to change, where I realized I wasn't, like we call it, people in recovery call it white knuckling, where it's like, I'm not going to do it, where that was no longer going on. And it started to change from the inside to where I think of a young pastor when this first happened in my life, and I was 38 years old at that time, and I talked with him, and he said, Lynn, if you stick to recovery and you stick to the work and you stick to the transforming power of God and you keep working your program, there'll come a day when the very thing that attracted you will repulse you. And I'm like, no way. I mean, I couldn't see that,
Right.
at all.
Right.
But now that's the case. I have come to a place where the very thing that attracted me, I know the truth of it now to the inside.
And God restored your marriage.
Actually, no.
He gave you a new marriage.
Right.
Because I know you're married and you have a beautiful wife. So
Yes, it's that's the unfortunate part of sometimes when we begin a journey with God, He transforms our life, but our mate has to do the same thing. We have to both have to enter that process. And at that time, my ex-spouse did not choose to do that.
Right, but God blessed you and
Over,
brought...
that took about 14 years, and then my marriage ended, and I am remarried now for 10 years. I've been with my wife Terry for nearly 13. And I have the marriage now that I never had. Because, and it's not blaming anyone, I have the marriage I never had because I am now who I am.
Right.
I am a new person.
Yes.
And I am just grateful that my wife Terry knows me now as the new person.
Yes. New coping
awesome.
skills, new interactions, new ideas from your mind, from your heart.
Right.
And your interactions are different from what they once were.
Exactly.
God can renew and restore.
He can. He gives second chances and new life.
Isn't that amazing? And just seeing how that pans out, and now watching what you're doing through your book, through a desire to help the young people understand getting help in that brokenness so they don't choose the coping mechanism like you did of addiction.
Right.
But even more than that, watching your heart for changing the sex and porn industry by reversing and going into the let's stop the demand for it. Let's not go to that addiction, because that enslaves other people as they are being forced to feed that addiction. And
which is why, Lynn, you are our ex-victim of the week.
Oh.
So thank you so much for coming
you.
in. This is
Well,
this is our gift to you. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And we've got chocolates and tissues and all kinds of good stuff for you.
Thank you very much.
and a mug to remind you of the fact that we're celebrating what you're doing to change the world through the fact that you've let God work in your life to then be a light and shine light for other people in a way for God to keep working in their lives and giving them hope, which is absolutely beautiful.
And not just for the men who are struggling, but also for the women who are in the industry as well, for them to have the opportunity to come out of that, to see there's a person beyond that.
And that's why we talk about using the fertilizer
Of our past
to bloom today, like you will actually be blooming.
A free PDF copy of the Bloom in the Dark book and a full list of Bloom Today's coaching tools can be found on bloomtodaytv.com. Then visit Bloom Today's Facebook group for deeper conversation.